Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Yusra Hulaimi and I am from IIUM. So I have two questions. The first is, does happiness in its ultimate sense come in degrees? Or can we say that a person is ultimately happier than another? Or is it an all or nothing experience? That is my first question. And then the second question is, how is the spiritual experience of Kasyaf or Dhawq or etc. is related to happiness? Because Izutsu, for example, he equates this experience with other experiences in other religions. For example, Satori in Zen Buddhism, Gnosis in Christianity, and so on and so forth. And I think the answer to this question is important because people nowadays have expanded awareness that they cannot find happiness in modern solutions. Therefore, they try to find it in more ancient traditions. But people also do not naturally find recourse to Islam. They also try to find solutions in other religions. So how do we differentiate between our authentic experience of happiness and other experiences of happiness in other religions or traditions? Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Muhd Amin. I am a PhD candidate at CASIS. My question is directed at both professors, but more particularly to Professor Zainiy. I'm interested with the exposition that on happiness and how it is related to the faculties. I remember in the lectures of Professor Said Muhammad Naqib Al-Atas, he talked about the 4 cardinal virtues that Aristotle talked about, and how we also have the equivalent to that in the tradition of Islam. And because in his book, in the Progomena to the Metaphysics of Islam, he talked about how even the ancient philosophers like Socrates, he used to go to ancient Egypt, Alexandria, and these wisdoms were floating about from the ancient prophets. As of in today's context, we are finding that these virtues are no longer talked about, the virtues of temperance, courage, wisdom, and whatnot. But now people are talking more about values, integrity, and even as a government servant, you know, these values are they are trying to instill these values in government officers. They talked about the importance of having integrity, and they list out the values that are in what does it mean to have integrity, the values of amana, of cleanliness, of honesty. Could you explain to us what are the difference between these virtues and values? Can values be subsumed under the virtues? Meaning the operating, the more overarching thing are the virtues, and underneath them are values which are social convention, or could you please explain?
Just to start, because most of the question is for Professor Zainiy, just to give a brief comment on Husni's question about the value of, for example, integrity. As I said, we are facing such a problem now. I mean, talking about ethics, isn't it? The ethical crisis. But sometimes, do they really understand what integrity is? The integrity between what, and what that person, that what, isn't it? I mean, if you are talking about integrity between the workers and boss, so workers and boss is not just workers and boss. They are men, but do they know what man is, and how the real element of man, which is spirituality. So by ignoring such a fundamental understanding of what man is, you cannot explain and discuss about integrity, because a worker, boss, husband and wife is just label to a very more fundamental reality, which is man. So we have to start with that. That is a brief comment. Thank you.
The question about the degrees of happiness.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly. The degrees of happiness is in relation to the degrees of your wusa, your capacity. Remember, Allah Ta'ala created each one of us, from the prophets right down to the lowest of us, of human being, in his or her own perfection, but everyone with his own qadar. Inna kulla shay'in khalaqnahu biqadarin. See, this is Quranic. So therefore, you will suffer happiness, or you will experience happiness different from my experience of happiness. And this is why sometimes, this whole advertisement about beauty, about being happy, it is trying to equalize everything. And that makes us, what you might call the thing in English, but you become covetous towards it, and that creates uneasiness, that creates unhappiness, because your wusa, your capacity, cannot allow you to have it. Like nowadays, every young one wants to travel, as if travel will make you happy. And they tell you, travel the world, you become a better person. And then people who cannot afford to travel suddenly feel depressed. This is a serious lie. This is why, like the Tuan Sri said, we must go back to the Islamic worldview. Like Rasulullah says, Inna kulla shay'in khalaqnahu biqadarin. Your innate capacity to carry, to experience anything, whether it is sense perception or whether it is spiritual, are of different levels. Therefore, you cannot mimic the salah of the Prophet thinking that you are of the same degree. Even though you may be praying next to a great big sheikh, an alim, your spiritual experience may be the size of an ant, which may be lower than the ant that spoke to Sulaiman alayhi salatu wasalam. Seriously, do you measure, there is a book coming out from the Western University, How Do You Measure Your Life? Which is basically physical. And these are the things that I talked about, and the discussion about happiness. I'm giving a 4 series of talks at somebody's house on this. So it's not just something that you can talk in 40 minutes. Then what about spiritual experiences between religions? Yeah? Well, this is something you must try to read, but I do not want to mislead you. There's a book by Fichoshuan, and it's called Transcendent Unity of Religion. I'm not advocating it. I'm trying to tell you, Professor Latas, in the book on Prolegomena to the Metaphysics of Islam, try to correct the misunderstanding, try to show that where the misunderstanding and the wrong thing about this idea of Transcendent Unity of Religion. Because the introduction by Houston Smith is quite misleading. There's no such thing as transcendent unity of religion, because Houston Smith was trying to explain the 2 planes of reality. One is called the external, the exoteric, the zahir, and the other one is the internal, the esoteric, the batin. And each line, there's a God at a point, diagrammatically speaking, each line, radiating. So that lines, one is Islam, the other Christianity, Hinduism. So for him, each line crossed the boundary between esoteric, the zahir and the batin, straight line like that. Professor Latas, when I showed him this book, he said, no, this is wrong. Really what happens, if they want to get to the understanding, the experience of God, the line as it comes to boundary between exoteric and exoteric, the batin and the zahir, apparently, think of it as an imaginary line. Once it hit the imaginary line, every point will go to the line that shoots you further on the line of Islam, on the trajectory of Islam. Because a simple thing, Prophet ﷺ says, the verse in the Quran, it is because you see, the only religion accepted by Allah SWT is Islam. There may be other religions, but the form of submission, the manner of submission, and this is why it is very important. You may have some religious feelings, you may have some practices that you might think it is religious or culturally religious in its history, but finally, the manner in which religion is accepted by Allah SWT, the form and the content of that religion is the one that is revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. So, yes, this is why we find similarities. Similar but not the same. Ikhwanna, this is something very important. And this is why you can have, now you have fake news. You can have fake religion. You have fake religions. Right? Will they suffer or experience, will they suffer misery? Yes. Will they suffer or experience happiness? Yes. Because happiness is what Allah SWT gives. Alright? But their submission is something else. You must understand that, because deen is something else. Their submission as a human being to the Creator, that is another matter altogether. This is why even for a non-Muslim, when he receives something that makes him happy, he is happy. He receives true knowledge, he seems happy. Even he receives wrong knowledge, he thinks it's a true knowledge, he is happy. Because the state of happiness, everybody has it. But we are talking about submission in religion. That's a different matter. Right? The acceptance of religion in terms of the service of the person, that has to go through the true and correct religion. And that religion, we must, in no uncertain terms, say that this is Islam. Right? And as you might want to ask me also, what would be their state? Well, just look up the hadith that talks about the salvation or the situation of people between two prophets. Allahu Alam. That's the answer that is given. All right? As far as the inner self and the outer self.